Hello again, crafters. I'm Taco Mage, and this is another Mekanism V8 Spotlight. Today we're going to be going over reactors. Now, I did cover reactors a bit in my primary Spotlight video, but I thought they deserved another look, especially now that I know more about them and can give you a little bit more insight into the inner workings. To start, though, I'd like to take a look at the gases again, and that's the two reactor gases of deuterium and tritium. Now, deuterium is the easier of the two to make, and it starts with a filter upgrade, which is a new upgrade in Mekanism V8. And to make it, it's just 2 glass, 2 enriched alloy around a tin dust. So very similar to the other upgrades that have existed in Mekanism for quite some time. To use one of these, you just put them into an electric pump, and that electric pump will then take one source block of water, or 1,000 millibuckets of water, and convert it into 10 millibuckets of heavy water. Heavy water can then be pumped into an electrolytic separator, which will separate it into deuterium gas and oxygen. In order to keep one electrolytic separator fed that is not upgraded, you'll need about 4 pumps. It's actually 3 pumps is not quite enough to keep one fed, and 4 pumps is just a little bit more than can keep one fed. So 4 pumps is what you're going to want. If you upgrade your electrolytic separator to be faster at all, you're going to need, of course, some more pumps. Now, the harder one is the tritium gas. Tritium gas requires a more complex setup because it requires the new solar evaporation towers, which are pretty much the same thing as the old salination plant, just with a new name. To keep one of these completely fed with water, you're going to need 6 electric pumps. Now, 6 electric pumps into one solar evaporation tower will produce brine, and brine is actually going to be your bottleneck, because if you take that brine and pump it out into a second solar evaporation tower, and both these towers are 18 blocks high, which is the maximum size they can be, it will produce that brine as fast as it's produced into liquid lithium. Liquid lithium into a rotary condensator set to decondensating will take that liquid lithium and turn it into regular lithium, or lithium gas. That lithium gas can then be pumped out into this new block called the Solar Neutron Activator. Solar Neutron Activators takes that gaseous lithium and turns it into tritium. Now, to make a Solar Neutron Activator, you just need 2 reinforced alloys, 1 HDPE sheet, 2 elite control circuits, a steel casing, and 3 bronze. So they're not actually that bad to make, especially once you get the plastic chain going. And with all that, you have 2 full threads, as it were, of gas production. Now, this is almost balanced, but it still does produce a little more deuterium than it does tritium gas. As you can see, I've got both gases pumping in here to this chemical infuser, making DT fuel. Now, there is a way to get this a little more balanced, and that is to either build a second solar evaporation tower to produce brine, which can then be pumped into this one lithium solar evaporation tower, or you can build one of these little guys. And this is a chemical oxidizer set to put its oxidized gas into this rotary condensator set to concentrate. And what you can do is take Mekanism salt, which you can find at the bottom of rivers, streams, those little ponds and lakes and stuff. You can put that in here, and it will take that salt and turn it into gaseous brine. Gaseous brine then can go into a rotary condensator and turn into regular brine. That brine can then be pumped into this lithium production tower in order to produce lithium more quickly. And that could be joined with an existing solar evaporation tower making brine, or you could even do your entire chain using that alone. You just need to make sure that you have enough salt to keep it up. So, with more brine production, you can bring this whole thing into a more balanced situation where you've got 2 gases producing at the same rate and going into your reactor. Now we've talked about gases, let's go over and talk about the actual reactors. Now, there's actually a new block to the reactors that has been introduced since I did my first spotlight. But let's take a look at the original blocks. We've got our basic block, which is the reactor frame, which is 4 steel casings around an atomic alloy, and for that you get 4 reactor frame. Reactor glass is 4 reactor frame around a regular piece of glass, which you get 4 reactor glass for. Also got the laser focus matrix, which is 4 reactor glass around a block of redstone to produce 2 laser focus matrices. You've got your reactor controller, which is 2 ultimate control circuits, a glass pane, glass tank, and 5 reactor frame. The other blocks are the reactor ports, which are for pumping things into and out of the reactor, including energy, gas, and liquid. And that's 4 reactor frame around an ultimate control circuit for 2 reactor ports. The new block is this guy. It's the reactor logic adapter, and this is so you can give your reactor control via redstone signals or computer craft. And that's 4 redstone around a reactor frame. And I'm actually not going to be covering the use of this block in the Spotlight because I'm not very good at computer craft, nor am I all that great at redstone control. So hopefully somebody else will step forward and do that Spotlight in order to show that off. The other thing you're going to need is a Hall ROM. To get a Hall ROM is pretty easy. You just take a piece of coal and put it into the metallurgic infuser to infuse 4 gold dust, and that gives you 1 empty Hall ROM. You then take the empty Hall ROM over to your chemical infuser and drop it in this central thing underneath the DT fuel. And that fills up with 10 DT fuel. So that's a Hall ROM that's primed and ready to ignite a reactor. Now to build a reactor, you're going to need to make several of what I've been calling pseudostars. So you could also, I suppose, call it a diamond or a sideways square. I like the word pseudostar. Now, this kind of shows what the requirements of the reactor is, and that is all these edges have to be reactor frame, but the stuff in the center can be any of the other blocks with the exception of the controller, which must go top center of the reactor. So to build this guy, you start off with a pseudostar on the ground like that, and I'll just grab these all out here. And then you need to build up your reactor frame. And that's just, again, pseudostars with all their points joined. So if we go here, so we've got a standing pseudostar as one side, so it's kind of like a cube of these pseudostars. And then, see, each of the pseudostars in this way are sharing a point. So you just keep doing this all the way around and on top. So I'll get back with you guys once I have finished putting this guy together, and then we'll fill out the reactor with all of its extra blocks. So now here we have an almost complete reactor. I've left the top block out because that's where the reactor controller is going to go. And as you can see, it's basically, as I said, a cube of these pseudostars, as I've been calling them. Now in order to finish this guy off, we're going to pull out all the blocks in the front here and replace the center area with glass and some reactor ports where we would pump the gas. And now you need 2 reactor ports, one for deuterium and one for tritium, and you could put an optional third one in here for pumping in DT fuel. Now I'll get to pumping DT fuel into reactors a little bit later. You're going to need at least one side for a laser focus matrix, and I always like to surround these in glass just because I think it looks better, but it's not required. And this is where you fire your laser in order to heat up the reactor for initial ignition. On the back you could put in your ports for pumping water and steam out, which I have set up over there, which we'll take a look at later. And on your remaining side you may want to put in another reactor port for pumping out the energy. In fact, you're definitely going to want that because otherwise there's no way to get energy out of this thing. And then, as I mentioned, the top center is where your reactor controller goes. And then once you put that in there, you see all your red sparklies and you know you have a complete reactor. Now once you have your reactor built, you're also going to want to build an array of lasers. In fact, you may want to start with that because it takes a lot of energy in order to heat one up, and the longer you're charging your lasers, the better. Now, in this case, I just have all the lasers just going right into the reactor, and that's to kind of show that just having lasers pumping into a reactor isn't all that helpful. In this case, we can see that the plasma heat is at 14.5 megakelvin, or 14.5 million Kelvin. And the requirements to light one of these things is 100 megakelvin, or 100 million Kelvin. So that's a lot less than what we need, and that's with 20 lasers pumping into this thing. In order to light one of these things just on straight laser power like that, you would need about 130 lasers from what I recall. Now before we get into that any deeper, let's go over the GUI here first. So when you open up your reactor, you start in this reactor controller screen, which just has an empty little box here, which is where you put your Hall ROM for ignition. There's the heat screen, which shows you the heat of your plasma, which is what controls your ignition and your power generation to a certain extent. You have your case heat, which is actually more directly related to your power generation. Plasma is actually most closely related to your steam generation, which I'll touch on later. You've got your internal capacitance, in which case this is completely filled. You've got your internal water buffer and your internal steam buffer. So all that's pretty self-explanatory. Next screen, you've got your reactor controller fuel screen, which is where you control the injection rate of your fuels, which says how fast you pump them in, which controls how much energy you produce. And then you've also got your DT fuel in the center and deuterium and tritium on the left and right as your internal capacity. Now the most important screen, though, is your statistics screen. And this basically tells you all about your reactor. Now with its current fuel injection, you'll see that we've got a passive generation of 0 down here, but we'll get to that in a bit. So the thing that's the same between air-cooled and water-cooled is that the ignition temp is always going to be 100 megakelvin. But in order to keep an air-cooled reactor turned on, you're going to need an injection rate of at least 2. For water-cooled, that injection rate has to be at least 4. Now, if you go over to your fuel here and change your injection rate, you'll notice that some things change in your reactor controller status screen, and that's your max plasma temp, your max casing temp, and your passive generation. You'll notice that we now have 150 megakelvin as your maximum plasma temp, and that's the temperature at which your plasma is going to stabilize at. Same thing goes for your max casing temp at 100 million Kelvin. And that's going to produce a passive generation of 200 KRF per tick. Now, if we bump that rate up to, say, 4, we'll see that the max plasma temp has gone up to 300 megakelvin, the max casing temp has gone up to 200 megakelvin, and the passive generation has gone up to 400 KRF per tick. And that actually does scale linearly all the way up. So if we go over here and put, say, 10 in, you'll see that this has gone up to 1 mega RF per tick. We've got 750 megakelvin for max plasma temp and 500 megakelvin for max casing temp. And the nice thing about that, if we can take it back down to 2 here, is that you'll always kind of know what your passive generation is going to be, because it's just going to be basically 100 kilo RF per injection rate. So at an injection rate of 2, we've got 200 kilo RF per tick. It also happens to coincide to your maximum casing temp divided by 500. So 100 megakelvin divided by 500 is 200 kilo and then RF, so without the Kelvin and into the RF. You could also do that by just saying 2 times this number and then drop it down 1,000. So however you want to do that. Now water-cooled, on the other hand, if we look at this, we'll see that the passive generation is once again your casing temp times 2, then divided by 1,000, so 25 megakelvin becomes 50 KRF per tick. But also that your steam production, that number matches your plasma temperature to an extent. So you've got 75 million Kelvin is 75 buckets per tick, or 75,000 millibuckets per tick. And again, that all scales linearly. So it's very, very easy math, and it's very easy to see how things scale up. So you can always kind of know where you sit. Now the other thing that's important is, as you see, I've got 20 lasers pumping into this thing, and that's 40,000 RF per tick. And if you look at this thing, it's actually producing energy. However, you can see that it's producing about 19.7 KRF per tick. So in a mode like this where you're just pumping in lasers to produce heat, you're only gaining about 50% of the power back that you're pumping into this thing. So it's always a good idea to turn off the lasers once you've ignited this thing and never let them just pump in. I mean, granted, when you've got one of these things going, you've got all kinds of energy to waste, but from an efficiency standpoint, you only want the lasers pumping into this thing when you're trying to light it, and then you want to be able to turn them off, which is why it's good to hook all your lasers up so that you can cut power to them. Now if we come over here, we can see a reactor set up for doing steam production. Now steam production is pretty easy. All it does is you take 2 more ports. In this case I put them on the back, and I've got 1 port here set up with water, and in a mechanical pipe set to pump in. On the side I've got just a mechanical pipe set to extract, and that will automatically extract steam into this dynamic tank. Now the important thing to recognize here is that your your production of steam is always directly proportional to your max plasma temp, as long as that temperature is up above the boiling point. And you don't actually have to ignite the reactor in order to make that happen. In fact, right here, I've got a laser amplifier set to 500 RF. Now if I turn this guy on, pumps in just a little beam there, but you can see that I'm already producing steam. In fact, as that heats up the reactor just to a little bit, so we're at 20 kilokelvin now, we're already producing a little bit of steam. So if you just had a steam production needs that are way below what these things can put out, and again at its lowest injection rate of 4, you're producing 150 buckets per tick, or 150,000 millibuckets per tick. That's enough to run 75 big reactor turbines at full speed. So you're probably never actually going to need that much steam generation until the new Mekanism steam turbine, or whatever steam utilization machine they cook up, comes into the game. So if you wanted to use one of these things just for steam production, you could easily tune a laser system so that it just produces steam by firing into this guy. And in fact, based on calculations, you could do that with as little as 2 lasers. You could use 2 lasers to produce just about enough steam to run a single big reactor turbine relatively well, and do it gainfully. So it's kind of a neat way to utilize a reactor controller, just without even having to put any reactor fuel into it at all. So over here I've got one set up for DT fuel usage. And basically what I've got here is I've just got this gas pipe that's been pumping out of my chemical infuser straight into this reactor. And what that has done, if we look over here, is that I've got my DT fuel all the way filled in here. Now you're never actually going to want to do this, probably, because what will happen is that DT fuel burns without control. That is to say that this reactor will burn through that DT fuel pretty much as fast as it can, and then it will starve itself, and the reactor will just peter out and go inert. Whereas with tritium and deuterium, your injection rate controls and maintains your reaction. So if we go over here and fire off this laser, you'll see that it will burn really hot for a while and then stop. And what that did is it burned through all of that DT fuel. So all that fuel is just gone, and it burned through it as fast as it produced. In fact, had I had that line hooked up to that chemical infuser over there, it would have sucked all that DT fuel out of the line and just burned through it all just as fast as possible until it ran out of fuel. And that chemical infuser would never be able to hold up with the speed at which it can burn the DT fuel. Now the positive side about that is that when it did that, it produced just a ton of heat. As you can see, we're at 1.43 gigakelvin, and that's producing a little under 2 mega RF per tick. So if we go over here to this energized induction matrix, you can see that it produced 2 giga RF just in that very brief reaction. So in a situation where you need a quick burst of energy, pumping DT fuel into a reactor is a great way to do that. It can be a good way to inject your system with a lot of energy all at once. But it's not really good as far as efficiency, because it's going to burn that fuel and you're going to get kind of the rising edge and the lowering edge of the temperature curve, kind of wasting some of your efficiency. But again, it's good for a really quick burst of energy when you need it. In fact, you could pump DT fuel into a reactor that is maintaining a stable reaction just to get a little bit more heat and a little bit more energy out of it, especially useful if, say, you're producing everything into a chemical infuser like over there, then you could just kind of run all 3 into your reactor. In general, though, you can probably do just okay with, or do well enough with just deuterium and tritium pumping into your reactor. And that's what this guy is over here. Now, I've actually got this reactor specifically set up to show you kind of what the minimum starting temperature is of a reactor. And more specifically, the minimum amount of energy that you need to pump out of an amplifier all at once into a reactor in order to get it to start. And that amount happens to be 400 million RF, all in one burst. So what I've done here is I've set this laser amplifier to pulse mode. So when I hit this button here, it's going to output exactly 400 million RF in a single beam of energy into that reactor. And that reactor is all set up to go. So if I hit this button, boom, it started. And if we go over here real quick and look at it, you'll see that we are just above the 100 million Kelvin needed in order to start that reaction. So, in order to start a reactor, you need 400 million RF. So, that's actually important information because the way I've got all these laser arrays set up in here is very wasteful, actually, because they're just pumping energy continuously that's being gathered in this laser amplifier, and once those laser amplifiers fill up to the 2 giga RF capacity, any additional laser energy that's fired into these amplifiers is completely lost. So that's very wasteful. So what I have over here is a neat little setup that I came up with to kind of tune your laser system so that it's not as lossy. Basically, I just got a single laser pumping into this amplifier, and it's already gained 255 million RF. And then I've got this couple of redstone controlling things here, and I've got basically a timer from RF Tools, and I set it to just 100 ticks, so that's 5 seconds. And then I've got a toggle latch from Blue Power. And what I do is if I go over here and grab this redstone out, I can set this toggle latch so that it becomes a latch and hold, and that's simply by putting redstone to the side that it's not currently active on. And then if I connect this toggle latch up to this timer, what it will do is it will, once it receives a pulse, it will latch and hold. And as you can see, the laser is off, and that laser amplifier had fired out all of its energy. And the reason that is because I've got this energy cell set to when it receives a redstone high signal, it turns off, so it cuts all power to this laser. Meanwhile, this laser amplifier is set to high mode so that when it receives a signal, it fires out all the energy that it's got in it. And in this way, what I could have done is I could tune this timer so that it would wait just enough time to charge up this amplifier to fire it off. And with a single laser, that's about 3 hours. So if I set this guy to, I think it was something like 29,000 ticks or something like that, it would just sit here, timing away. I'd have to have like a chunk loader, or I'd need to be standing here, but it would just slowly wait for this amplifier to build up, and then it would fire off the system, and that would ignite my reactor. So I could do that with as little as 1 laser that way. So yeah, that's a neat little setup to kind of keep you from wasting energy, especially in a situation where your current energy is at a premium and you don't want to have to power a whole bunch of lasers. But that's pretty much it. That is my reactor spotlight. And that's pretty much everything that I know about reactors, and I'm hoping that's just about everything there is to know about reactors, aside from the computer control and the redstone control, which unfortunately is out of my depth. But I think this is really going to be my last Mekanism V8 Spotlight. There's not a whole lot that I haven't covered. There's a couple of UI things here and there that aren't really all that critical. So I'm just going to pretty much leave it at that. I think this will be my last Mekanism V8 Spotlight. I hope you've enjoyed all of my spotlights. I've really enjoyed putting them on and kind of learning everything there is to Mekanism version 8. But until next time, I've been Taco Mage, and I will see you all later.